I, 33 male, found out that my wife, 33 female, of 5 years, had been cheating on me with 2 different coworkers. My wife and I had a pretty standard marriage. We had our problems, but we always found ways to work through them. She and I had not been married long before the pandemic, and the constant isolation together brought up a lot of issues in our marriage that we hadn't really noticed before. We heard all over the news that the lockdown had caused a lot of divorces, and we didn't want to add our marriage into those numbers. We went to therapy to try to work through our problems, and we came out stronger on the other side, or so I thought. My wife had always been very career-focused. She would work extra late hours, weekends, she would even go in on some holidays. She was close to making a partner at the law firm she worked at, and we knew that those sacrifices she was making would only pay off in the long run. So, when she wasn't coming home from work until 8 o'clock in the evening, I didn't really think much of it. Because of her job and the confidentiality involved, when she would get phone calls, I was used to her stepping away into her office to take them. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Until I got an email from an anonymous source about my wife. The email suggested that my wife might have been involved with one of her coworkers. I didn't believe it at first. I actually almost wanted to go to her and tell her that somebody was spreading lies about her, but something told me to keep it to myself. I replied back asking for further clarification, but I got none. Honestly, I wondered if it was a disgruntled client trying to tear at the threads of her life. Even though I didn't believe it, the idea of it still played in the back of my mind. It's difficult to admit, but I was a little paranoid about it. One night, shortly after I'd received the email, she texted me telling me that she would be in the office working on a case, and she didn't know when she would be back. Something in my brain tingled connecting that text message to the email that I'd been sent, and I needed to find out if the email was telling the truth. I didn't want my wife to know that I was suspicious of her, so I got some takeout and brought it to her office. Worst case scenario, I go in and she is in the middle of some sexual act with her coworker. Best case, I go in and she's knee-deep in paperwork and happy I brought her some dinner. When I got there, it almost seemed like she must have left already. All the lights were off. There wasn't a soul in sight. I almost turned around and left, but then I heard the moaning. It was coming from down the hall, and I had to know if the email had been true. I walked down and saw my wife in her office with one of the partners of the law firm, and they were having sex. Now my wife is an attorney, and a great one at that. I knew right away that there was no forgiving her or pretending like this didn't happen, so my only option was to leave. But going up against her, her word versus mine, would never work out. I ended up hiring a private investigator to follow her around and gather some evidence. When I hired him, I assumed that I would just be getting some pictures or some videos of her and the partner, and I definitely wasn't expecting to find out she was sleeping with another coworker. She had been cheating on me with 2 different coworkers. I had plenty of evidence, so I sought out a divorce attorney. They knew who my wife was right away. She was coming up in the community, and she'd made quite a name for herself. But they agreed to take the case. While my attorney was getting the paperwork together, I knew I needed to do something to enact my revenge on her. I found her employee manual in her office, scored through it, and found some information that I definitely thought could help. Office romances were strictly forbidden. My wife was good friends with her boss, and there were a few times that he and I would get together to play golf, so I reached out to him and asked if he wanted to go out. He'd agreed, and I met him at the country club. During lunch, I told him everything. I showed him the evidence that I had. He was shocked that my wife would cheat on me with 2 different coworkers, and he was also appalled that they had so blatantly disregarded the company's rules, on company property nonetheless. He told me that all 3 of them would be facing termination. When I got home, my wife asked me about how golf was. I told her everything and told her that we were going to be getting divorced. About an hour later, when she was begging me to forgive her, her boss called and told her he wanted to speak to her first thing in the morning. She was fired the next day. She swore up and down that I had messed with the wrong person, that she was going to take me for everything I had, and I would regret the day that I screwed her over. Luckily for me, my divorce attorney was very good at her job. Thanks to the evidence that the private eye that I hired was able to gather, I was able to divorce her without sacrificing any of my assets. I'm not going to lie, it's been difficult adjusting to a life without her. But I'm noticing now a lot of the stressors in my life have gone away now that she is no longer in the picture, and I'm looking forward to fully healing from this and getting myself back out there. Edit. I realized I didn't put this in the original text, but the person who sent the email was the wife of the partner that my wife had been sleeping with. Apparently, she found text messages between them and thought she should tell me about it. OP, I'm terribly sorry for what you had to go through. It's hard to believe that someone would stoop so low in their relationship. I'm glad you were able to leave the marriage without having to give up anything that you worked so hard for. All three of them getting fired for their actions was the least of their concerns. You handled yourself in a very mature way, bringing the attention to light without causing a scene with your wife in front of her boss too. I would be interested to know if she tried to come up with a reason for her infidelity or if it was just convenient for her to see both of the other coworkers. I hope you are able to recover from this soon and put yourself back out there, and I wish you nothing but happiness moving forward. Now let's get into our second story for today. A decade ago, I, 43 male, stood at the altar, head over heels in love with my soon-to-be wife, 40 female. As soon as we met, we fell for each other. We never wanted to be away from each other, and we both knew almost right away that we had finally found the person we were meant to be with. We only dated for 6 months before we eloped together. Our lives had been amazing since then. Both of our careers took off, we had 2 children together, and we bought a wonderful home in the suburbs. We had the picture-perfect life. That is until it came crumbling down in front of us. She and I had always been transparent about the things going on in our personal lives. Though we cherished our time apart to pursue our own personal interests. She had always been interested in things like pottery, art, and music, whereas I was pursuing a side hustle of making my own furniture. At the end of every day, we would climb into bed and tell each other what we did to fill the other in. In hindsight, she had left a lot of information out about what she was doing. It didn't strike me at the time, but when I would ask her about what she did, she would be vague compared to how she used to be, where she used to give me every detail of the pottery class she was taking. She was only telling me that they made pinch pots or they glazed the ceramics. She ended up taking a course at the local community college for business marketing because she and I had long been talking about creating our own home goods line. I would make the furniture and she would make decor, vases, glassware, etc. This class was something that I was also very interested in because of the prospect of it helping us later down the line. When I asked her for some of the details and to share some of the notes she had, she would get somewhat defensive and tell me that I didn't trust that she was doing a good enough job taking the course. That led to a huge argument between us where she told me that I treated her like a child sometimes. I genuinely didn't know what she was talking about, but I promised her that I would try to work on whatever it was making me act that way. One thing that I did notice, but I didn't think much about, was she would get phone calls and excuse herself to answer them. Sometimes she would get text messages and she would tilt her phone away from me or lay down on the couch in the opposite direction so I couldn't see what she was texting. Not that I normally peered over her shoulder to read what it was, but it was the extra effort to hide it that was a clear sign of something wrong. I just wished that I'd realized that at the time. It all came to a head when my wife rushed into the shower after spilling coffee all over herself one morning. She was upset and frustrated and worried about being late for work, so she didn't bring her phone in like she normally did. Normally, she would bring it in and play music from the speaker while she showered. She left it sitting on the kitchen table and I didn't think anything of it. Until a call came through from her professor. I was very curious about why he was calling her. Granted, it had been years since I've been in college, but when I was in school, if a professor needed to get in contact with us, they would email us. The phone call ended, and I let my curiosity get the better of me. I opened up her phone while she was still in the shower and looked at their contact history. There had been dozens of calls between the both of them, some lasting as long as 45 minutes. Some were video calls, too. Immediately, I had a terrible feeling about what I would find in the text messages, but despite my better judgment, I opened them anyway. They had both been exchanging explicit, graphic text messages between each other alongside pictures. My heart shattered when I saw everything. At the time, that was the first sign of anything going on that I picked up on. I was completely blindsided by the news. How could my wife have done that to me? How could she have betrayed our entire family? I could still hear the shower running, but I knew I only had a few minutes to figure out what I wanted to do with that information. At the very least, I know I wanted to get him fired. If I confronted my wife about it right then, she likely would have deleted the evidence, and I would have had nothing to show the school. I ended up screenshotting some of the more explicit parts, as well as some of the pictures they had exchanged, then texted them to myself. After I did that, I deleted the screenshots and the text messages between us. Before my wife got out of the shower, I yelled through the door that I had to leave to go into work a little bit early. I simply could not look at her after what I saw. I ended up taking the day off work and spending it near the docks watching the seagulls over the water. During that time, I figured out how I wanted to go about this. My wife had been dying to get all of our friends and some of our family together for a potluck dinner, so I decided to make that happen. Most of our friends were people that we knew through my work, and my wife was very close to my sister and her husband. I knew if I wanted to hurt her back, it would be by tarnishing her relationships with these people. The day of the dinner, I scheduled a meeting with the dean of the college my wife had been taking the course at. While I was there, I showed her all of the details about how a professor was sleeping with a student and exchanging very inappropriate messages. I showed her the evidence, and the dean made it seem like this wasn't the first time there had been a complaint about that specific professor. She promised to make sure the proper actions were taken to terminate him this time. When the potluck eventually rolled around and all of our friends walked into our home with their dishes, everything seemed normal. I had planned on making a toast to everyone, then telling them about the impending divorce between my wife and I, but fate had another plan in mind. The professor stormed over to the house, banging on the door. I answered it, and he pushed past me and rushed over to my wife to yell at her. He demanded to know why she told the dean about their relationship. Everyone else in the room watched completely stunned. I spoke up and told him that I was the one who told the dean. My wife looked at me in complete shock. I told her that I found her text messages, and the dinner was my official announcement of our separation. The professor was so upset with me for costing him his job that he lunged across the table at me to attack. I am much larger than him. I work out regularly, so I was able to subdue him quite easily. However, I was definitely keen on pressing charges on top of getting him fired. In the end, my wife practically begged for my forgiveness because she realized how crazy the professor was. However, I had absolutely no interest in forgiving her. For our children's sake, I would be amicable and try to make sure the divorce wasn't messy, but there is no chance she and I will be together again. OP, first of all, I want to offer my condolences for everything you went through. Sometimes it's the people you trust the most who will throw that away over nothing. It's hard to acknowledge the signs at the time, but from what you described, they definitely were all there. It's probably for the best that the professor lost his job, especially if it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It's unfortunate that he decided to take his frustration for his own deeds out on you. He brought his punishment on himself. I'm happy you were able to move on from your wife and maintain a friendly relationship for your children, and I wish you nothing but the best in the future. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.